and welcome once again to both of you. This is an interview conducted by TISA in conjunction with the Elephant. And the reason we felt it was important to have this discussion is because of how important the issue of informal trade is, especially during this, the COVID pandemic. And we are looking at the response of government in this sector and the response of all stakeholders. But before we get into it, we'd like to get to know you a little bit. And if you don't mind, I'll try and do an introduction because you were kind enough to share your very illustrious bios. So Dr. Miriam Omolo is the Executive Director at the African Policy Research Institute, APRI. You have over 15 years of experience in international trade and development and poverty issues, and you've worked for leading think tanks in the country, Africa Economic Research Consortium, Institute for Economic Affairs, and you also consult for the World Bank. You're also a lecturer with the Strathmore University Business School. I'd also like to welcome Charles Warria, the Chief Operations and Learning Officer at iGov Africa. Charles is a development economist and results expert with extensive experience and expertise in public sector and private sector in Africa. And he also has very broad experience in civil society performance management. He has extensive experience in market system analysis and value chain transformation. He previously worked with the Kenya Markets Trust and Deloitte East Africa, and has engaged extensively as an external learning facilitator in various projects. We're very welcome. You're very welcome. We're fortunate to have you here. Karibuni sana. So Karibu, maybe we'll start with you. From your position at APRI, what do you view as the biggest challenge that government is facing with the COVID outbreak?
I'll look at it from several angles. From the consumption angle, are households going to be food secure or food insecure? That's the first thing, because people are not working and people have to eat. So there's a challenge of food security. That's at the consumption level. At the production or farm level, are businesses in operation? And if they are not in operation, or depending on the percentage in operation, we've seen the essential services. What happens to what we consider non-essential? And with what is considered non-essential, they are not in operation. How is government going to collect tax? So that is very important.
All right, thank you.
So they're having like 3 issues. We've not talked about health as well. The risk of a sick nation. So if you mix all this together, all because of COVID-19, we need to really strategize from a multifaceted approach. Yeah.
All right. Does APRI have a particular response to COVID, or what initiatives might you be taking? You could tell us briefly.
Currently, the initiatives we are taking, which is taking a bit of time, is generating information. And the information we are generating is data-driven to help in establishing how can the government act. Like right now, the initiatives we are taking, because we are on the intellectual side and on think tank side, is who are the vulnerable? And even with the COVID health data we are having, is there a risk that the statistics we are seeing can worsen? So those are some of the questions we are asking. We are also trying to establish how the sectors are linked in the country, so that we see with the priority sectors, if they are open, how can we work with them in such a way that we gain? Because currently sectoral linkages remain weak.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Charles, karibu pia.
Thank you.
As an icebreaker, you can also tell us your views in terms of COVID and what are the key challenges you see us facing government, and which of those are you dealing with in your work?
Right. I think the COVID-19 came at a time more like a wake-up call, really, because governments, especially the Kenya government, has performed dismally in emergency response. In spite of the fact that the country has had numerous epidemics in the past in terms of disasters and all, this particular one should have found the country more prepared. But there has been years and years of malpractice, unpreparedness, disjointed efforts, uncoordinated efforts, even in the smallest of emergencies. For example, even if there's a landslide, there's never a coordinated government response to deal with the populations that are affected from a landslide. If a building collapses, you see how they scramble left, right, and center, trying to save lives, So in spite of the fact that there's national agency for disaster management and all, this has revealed the lack of preparedness by Kenya government in as far as handling emergency situations is concerned. Secondly, we also see how the government of Kenya has not had a proper coordinated mechanism to deal with vulnerable populations. So right now it's a bit of a helter-skelter, is wake up and announce this social distancing thing, wake up and announce work from home. They have no statistics on how many Kenyans actually can work from home and have jobs that allow them to work from home. Over 80% of Kenyans who say they work actually work from outside the home. So that working from home is a facade. If somebody runs a salon, you can't run a salon from your house. If you're a hawker, you can't hawk things from your house. If you're mama mboga, you can't sell vegetables from your house. So almost 80% of Kenyans who engage in some form of income generation do not work from home. But it shows you how disconnected the Kenya government is from the population. So that and that's feeding into this lack of responsiveness, because they do not know which cohorts are most affected, which are the strategies that work for those cohorts, where are they, how many are they, what are the clusters, and that kind of thing. So they don't have all that. So it's keeping people screwed to the TV every day and come and tell us there's nine new infections and that's it. You wake up and you say, we have banned all food distributions. It's only through coordinated government efforts. Another CS wakes up and says 50% of it is being stolen, by same government people. You wake up and say, so what's the strategy? How do we support most vulnerable households? And there's none.
So Charles, you're taking us to where the crux of our question. Did you want to share with us your work and how you may be contributing to the COVID response in your capacity?
Yes, so as iGov Africa, we are a tech firm, and what we're doing now is we are partnering with the funders like David. We're also managing a program called the Kenya Catalytic Jobs Fund, which is basically meant to provide funds to SMEs that are innovative and entrepreneurial. Now, COVID hit us right in the middle. So we've had to quickly adapt a new strategy, pull together some funds, about 400,000 or so pounds, to redirect it towards SMEs that have innovations that respond to COVID. So we're looking in the next couple of days, or probably up to by next week, we're going to start rolling out this fund to SMEs that have quickly reorganized their operations to find something that they can do that is innovative, that would contribute towards mitigating the effect of COVID, not just in the health sector, but in other sectors. You know, for example, looking at what is the emerging food crisis, do they have some innovation around quickly addressing the food crisis, you know, and all that, things like Safari, and, you know, how then do you use new technologies to not just mitigate COVID, but also mitigate other diseases. And also we're looking to by the next week or so, roll out this new fund, emergency fund.
Okay, wonderful. So, you know, just straight into it. Of course, we've got a large informal sector. Government estimates give us, you know, 83% of Kenyans working in the informal sector. And I think, Charles, you've already alluded to this, and Miriam has also mentioned the risks. To what extent is government speaking to this critical sector when they talk about the COVID response? And what are the likely impacts this sector is having from the COVID outbreak and response? And we can start with you, Charles, since you had the chair. And then we'll come over to you, Miriam. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. I think one of the problems really with the government responses all across the world is they tend to be a bit elitist because governments are run by elites. And so by that very nature, they're not properly plugged into and connected with the masses, you know. We have not seen mechanisms where the executive is conversing with industry, conversing with representatives on the ground, for example, MCAs and the village elders and you know, CBO people and all people who have the pulse on the population have been completely sidelined from these strategies, you know. And then you have a few boardroom meetings at the executive level to come up with things they imagine should be happening, but are not pegged on proper strategies, you know. So you wake up and you look forward to listening to the address for the day to find something tangible. For example, do they even have the statistics of the number of informal businesses in this country? How are they coordinating with counties? You don't see counties brought in to say, look, in my county, I have 1 million small businesses registered and unregistered. Here's how they have been affected by this. Here's where they are. We have mapped out their locations. We know who they are. We know their associations. We know how their incomes are reduced. Those conversations are not there. And then you hear, oh, there's a couple of billions have been set aside, but you're not sharing the strategy of what is the database on channeling these billions? What are the structures in place? You know, how will we track who gets and who doesn't get, you know, and where they are and what they do with the money. On the one hand, the government will come out and say, oh, we're going to set aside money to do certain things. But on the other hand, how are you opening up businesses? So how are you opening up the streets, even partially, for those traders who are affected, who may receive this kind of support to go back and trade? You know, how are counties who closed markets opening up markets? You know, even partially. You know, what are the strategies in place to get the economy to begin to function from a restricted point of view, even as we think about, you know, how to roll out more efforts. But the biggest thing really is the elitist approach that has been taken that doesn't seem to resonate. Doesn't seem to resonate at all with the needs of the masses. You know, every day those who are not able to sell their wares anymore because they're required to stay some meters apart from the next person. So you can't do your trade. I speak to many people in the informal sector who have closed shop. Some of them actually feel victimized. For example, I spoke to a couple of salon owners, and they said, look, how can they say salons are points of spreading this thing? How are we spreading this thing? Because they do not know how their salons are spreading it. You know, and because of that, their clients have now been scared. So clients are not coming to the salons anymore. Landlords are looking for rent. The salon owners can't pay their own house rent. They can't pay the rent for the salon. Everybody's panicking. People are now saying, look, what is the way forward? What do we do? You know, and that kind of thing.
Right. You know, Miriam, to bring you in, of course, you opened up by enumerating the impacts, you know, in terms of food security, in terms of revenues. When you look at the informal trade, what do you think are the direct impacts on them? And then there's the question that you raised and Charles has also raised about lack of data. We seem to be doing a lot of guesstimates. You know, so, you know, in terms of impact, do you think government is getting it right? Do you think there's data they should be using? Is there a lack of data? And you know, what's really, what would you say the government response is at present, in your view, if you were to say how it's going?
Let me build from what Charles has been saying, because we are talking about informal traders or the small-scale traders in the informal sector. And you've mentioned rightly that they are representing around 83% of employment. But we cannot define them. So how can we even establish impact? We can only tell their characteristics. And I'll just pick out a few. They are made of young and old people who either were previously employed or left employment or were not successful in getting employment. And then they moved into their own businesses to become their own bosses, so that they can become flexible as well in terms of balancing family income generation, depending on someone's priorities. They tend to be micro, small, very limited in potential for growth. So when they need to expand, they are limited because they cannot access credit due to lack of collateral. That's a second characteristic. So you find even registering becomes a problem because they don't get profits all the time. Sustainability is an issue. Because of also inability to register, these same institutions don't adhere to the tax requirements. You find most of them don't pay licenses, but the market traders pay market fees. So they are neither here nor there. So back to your question, what is the government doing? Government has talked of SMEs. There's already some data on micro and small enterprise, which we are already analyzing. And once we have the results, we are going to share them. But how about the informal small-scale traders? Are they defined here? Remember, they're not in the tax bracket. So where will government know them? Most of them are organized through associations. And therefore, adding to what Charles said, if you go to CBOs, if you go to MCAs, you will get the pulse of these organizations. Or if you've interacted with them at project level, so the data is anecdotal. But we are making decisions about them. I don't know whether we are really making decisions about them.
How will you make decisions if you don't, if you haven't really defined them? Of course, there's a historical issue. You know, so is it elitism? Is it really a genuinely difficult problem? Are they a sector that government prefers to ignore? Is it a combination? But how will government make decisions if they don't have the data? And
It's
if
a
they don't know
mixture.
who these associations are?
It is a mixture. There's the elitist component because decisions are made in the boardrooms. These people are not in the boardrooms, they're in the markets. They are the people you see selling outside the market. The people you see by the roadside. The small kibanda you see next to Mjengo. The small salons you see with 3 chairs, but people are always there and it's always full. So the elitist part is because the decision has not been made to look for them, but are also a mixture of issues because even the informal sector are not able to pay any taxes for reasons known. One, first of all, your income cannot even sustain you. So how do you pay for licenses which you don't even have guaranteed return? So you find there are many factors at play, but I believe this sector can be very well defined. And a good starting point where there are a lot of associations, the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce, KNCCI, I know there are quite a number of networks that are already registered there. If you go to the counties and even the markets themselves, there are a number of associations that are there. These people are organized. In that informality, they are quite organized. There is also a lot of mistrust because previous studies that we've done in Nairobi County, you find that they say that they pay taxes, but the taxes, they don't see services. They pay market fees. They don't see services, garbage collection. But they're the first ones to be closed that they are unhealthy, but they pay licenses or they pay fees, but they don't get services in return.
So I think what I hear you and Charles saying is one of the first things government has to do is find ways to talk to the traders, to the informal traders through the associations. And I think that brings up another issue in terms of government response. And I'll ask it in two regards. Government has already instituted several, tax measures and the like. To what extent have the measures, reduction of turnover tax, reduction of VAT, removal of mobile phone fees by Safaricom and things like that, to what extent have the measures that government has talked about been beneficial to informal traders? And then how should government order its response? Because you're talking about informal traders scattered maybe through various urban areas. You've also got then in rural areas, you've also got there in informal sector, because again, people working in the agricultural small scale, farmers again are spread out, maybe just organized at Chama or some other level. So on one hand, have government measures yet responded to this sector? And then how should government reach these people who are not organized? And could that be why government then works with what it can see? So those are two questions. And we'll start with you, Miriam. You have the floor so that we'll go back to Charles. We balance.
Okay. The first thing, if you look at this, I don't know whether to call it, it was a law or the memo, the COVID response fund, where they had outlined some of this reduction of turnover tax from 3 to 1%. And at the same time, the reduction of VAT and removal of mobile phone fees. Take example of a salon. Let's take example of a salon. Are they bound to pay the turnover tax? That is the first question. So that were they paying it, that now they'll have more income by paying 1%. Were they paying it in the beginning? Because as it is, that turnover tax, even its administration is a problem. Historically, it was there, it was removed, now it's been brought back. So on paper, it will look good that they've reduced it, but were they paying it in the first place? So they've not yet been assisted. That's the first thing. They've not yet been assisted, that's the first thing. And then secondly, there is 13 billion being paid to SMEs. We've not defined them. So you'll find most of the SMEs that we gain are already within the tax payroll of Kenya Revenue, can I say? Are these people in that group that can say, I am an SME employing 5 people, employing 2 people? No. So the answer, if you go by that checklist, the answer is no, no. And even VAT, we've been told VAT is coming from 16 to 14%. Have they been paying VAT on what? On the goods or on the services? So it will look good, but now when you go to the ground, things are different on the ground. I don't think these people are gaining, but these are 83% of the employees of this nation. So my answer would be no, they're not gaining.
They're not gaining from the measures. And the question I had going with that is, what should the government response then look like? You know, what, yeah.
Yes. I think the response should look like it's, let me put it in a way that will not answer you, but answer you. In a way that's catering for the informal sector. The first thing, do we know them? So we are going back to where we started. Do we know them? We don't know them. So they should start looking for them. In this case, we are talking about looking for, at least the good thing is that we are looking for the needles in the haystack. We are not looking for the haystack. Yeah, because if you're looking for the haystack, then you look for the needle, it's a lot of work. But we know the haystack. So now let's look for the needles in the haystack. It can be done. Yes. So for me, the first thing would be identify them. They can be identified. But secondly, build trust. You will not identify them if you don't, there's no trust between the two parties. So building trust means building dialogue, creating dialogue frameworks. It could start at the county level, because again, if you're looking at informal sector and the functions of the counties, it starts from the counties because it's a devolved function, I can say. Trade, yes. So in the internal trade, in this case, especially where we are talking about counties, trade and markets. So start that dialogue and identify them, but it has to be done quickly.
Right, yes. Charles, do you have any input into that?
Yes. As Miriam rightly puts it, this turnover tax shouldn't have been there in the first place. As a matter of fact, it's a game that government through KRA has been playing. They tried to play it a couple of years back, it didn't work. And because of it, they introduced the presumptive tax. Now, in these COVID measures, they did not mention presumptive tax. And yet, presumptive tax is where they collect mandatory tax, 15% of the value of your annual permit from every small business, you know. And the catch is, before you get your business permit renewed, you show a receipt that you have already paid 15% presumptive tax, you know, and counties are required to enforce it. So if you go to the smallest of the county office, they will not renew your smallest of business permits unless you show proof that you have paid presumptive tax. So government was clever that they were going to catch everybody who runs a small business who requires a permit. Now, so which means that if you're going to renew your permit, even in the times of COVID, you still have to pay that tax. Now, turnover tax failed because there was no mechanism of getting the turnover value from small businesses. Businesses barely keep inventories. They barely use ETR receipts. So there's no way you can accurately compute what they sold in the year and therefore calculate turnover tax on it. So whether you reduce it to 1% or reduce it to 0.1%, it doesn't matter, because you had no mechanism of collecting it in the first place. And that's why they introduced presumptive tax. Now, having said that, and you link it back to VAT, an argument has been made, rightly so, that businesses pay tax when they trade. If the business ecosystem is closed, whether you reduce it, whether you increase it, you're not going to get the tax because they didn't trade. You know, so you calculate it based on the amount they bought and sold. Whether you reduce VAT from 16 to 14, you will have to compute it on what we sold. If our shops were closed, restaurants have been closed for a while, many businesses are closed for a while, so automatically that revenue is going to go down. Even for government, they know it, where they sit, they know that in this period of COVID, the decisions they made have and will lead to massive loss of government revenue. They know that, and I'm sure, I hope they're preparing for it, because there's a huge slump. As a matter of fact, when the COVID-19 broke out, Central Bank released a circular and said that the economic development growth was going to go down from 6.2 to around 3.4. So already the CBK predicted a slump, you know, and therefore it would imagine that instead of dilly-dallying, you put in place measures to cushion, protect the population, but cushion trade, so that trade continues, you know, as you protect population. So you can even, I mean, simple ideas that do not require any engineers. For example, tell people, wear a mask, wear a glove, and go about your business. You know, protect yourself, protect your customer, and go about your business.
Charles, you sound like you're taking the Magufuli line or Swedish line that business needs to continue. You know, because on one hand, you sound like you're saying that. I don't know if that's what you're saying. Government has a kind of partial, I don't know if we have a full shutdown, because we've been asked to stay home, but it's understood that some businesses still have to continue. So are you arguing that government should open up, or what? And then the other thing is, drawing on what you're saying, on the argument, what are you recommending should be done around the payment of VAT? Should there be an exemption? We know government is broke, it has no revenue. How will it then cushion? So there's a quandary, a lot of it fueled by coming into this with empty coffers and high debt. But now that we are here, what are you saying? Do people go back to work? Do they stay home? Do we scrap VAT, suspend VAT? And then how do we cushion? Hard question.
Now, yes. So ordinarily, let me go back a step. Every prediction is saying that the economic impact of COVID is going to far outweigh the health impact of COVID. Now, nobody seems to be having a clue on how to then respond to that prediction. You know, that every sector is going to be hit so badly. I mean, take a look. How much is KQ losing every day by aeroplanes not being in the air? Now, we're not saying open up the airspace. No, we're not saying open up the airspace. But we're saying, how are we rethinking our economic activities, you know, to emerge out of this situation not dead? Because we're going to either way, it's going to hit badly. And then beginning to ask, so because COVID is already here, how do we work with it to then keep the economy running? You know, how do you, for example, what they're doing now with restaurants and saying, look, you can reopen under certain conditions. Now that's a good move. They should have thought about it earlier, you know, because people have been staying home and jobless. Hotels have closed, you know, and that kind of thing. So how can we then open up these other sectors to scrutiny and say, what are the measures that we need to put in place that will protect the populations, but keep these sectors up and running. In the near future, in the next few weeks, Kenya is going to face massive food crisis. You know, it's already happening in certain food outlets because of the disruptions in food production and trade, you know, and all that. So they're not saying, but you watch this space, in the next 1 or 2 weeks, there's going to be a food crisis because of this. Now that wasn't addressed. Now, in terms of taxes, therefore, because again, we don't want the government to wake up and say, now we have no revenue, and therefore there cannot be medicine in schools, teachers can't be paid, these guys can't be paid, police can't be paid because there was no revenue because of COVID. So again, is looking back and saying, not every sector is shut down. So there are certain sectors that are operating. Can they pay what they can pay? The sectors that are worst hit, what are the measures that can be put in place to cushion them, you know, to allow them to get, yes.
If I was to now bring, so you're saying that government needs to be a bit more pragmatic, open up a little bit more. There's a big fear that informal sector, the ability to comply is limited due to the conditions under which informal sector trades. So if restaurants open up, you're talking about formal restaurants, of course, casuals then go back to work, that's a good thing, and you know, open up a few more jobs. But what about the informal sector? Hawkers have been taken off the streets, street food, of course, off the streets. Markets are open. Markets can't cater for all the population. So how practical is that for the informal trade? So we may open up partially, but still have informal traders sitting at home.
And that's where government must come in terms of seeking endogenous solutions. Problem with some of these governments is they imagine that citizens don't know, you know. But if you put out a call today and ask citizens, in fact, even the hawkers, how can you best do your trade while protecting yourself and your customers? You'll be amazed how in the next few minutes they'll give you brilliant ideas because they have been thinking about it. They are hard hit, the shoe is pinching them, you know. All they need is someone to seek their opinion on how can you do your business while protecting your customer and the person next to you. And they'll come up with these ideas.
So you're saying it's back to public participation, it's back to dialogue, like Miriam was saying. So Miriam, what's your view on this? And then next we'll move to the issue of food security.
Talking about how do we go about it, and picking from where Charles is saying, because looking at it, take example the salons, okay? They were the first ones to be closed. Why were they closed? Because they assumed a lot of contact. But this is a place where it has all the shampoos, it has all the soaps, it has all the hygiene you want. So you are in contact with someone who is always washing, always having soap. So I see it is a bit too late. Already the measures in place by government are good, like the health ones, social distancing, wash your hands, and stay at home. But we realize when we stay at home, we'll be hungry. So if you go to these informal sectors and ask them, how best can we cope? Go to the barbers. These are the people who really know, because they don't work, they'll be hungry. You've seen pictures of markets where they are practicing social distancing in the markets. I've seen it outside. I think I've seen it in Rwanda. We can do it with our markets, but it brings in the element of planning. We go back to our planning and budgeting. Does the government ever put in sufficient funds for markets, market development? This is now county government. The answer is no. So we can have immediate solutions. The first thing, how can they cope as businesses? Of course, there are those ones who will do funny things. But again, this goes back to research. I'm more inclined to research and in the health sector. Why is it that there was an expectation that there would be a lot of rampant spread of this disease in most African countries, and in Kenya, it was estimated that by end of April we would have 10,000. The last speech of the president, we had 343 cases. They are talked of 10,000 cases. So why isn't this spreading? Is it that we have an immunity? So while we're making these decisions, it has to be tampered with research, not fear, because there's a lot of fear peddling and fear mongering. Maybe we had it and we survived it. And you can look at the success rates, the recovery rate. So research at the national level must go on in the health sector, whether it's KEMRI or Ministry of Health. That has to happen concurrently. Because you can see that the health sector does not work in isolation.
So as we are thinking about, governments working on their supplementary budgets, these are some of the areas it needs to put money. Not firing the lead scientist and not funding KEMRI, because up to the recording of this interview, from the reports we are getting in media, KEMRI has not yet received any additional support for COVID response.
Before you even look at the support that KEMRI is yet to receive, look at the trends. Funding in KEMRI for the last 10 years, the funding mix, government and external. Then you get your answer. The goal donor sets the rules. We have to set the rules on COVID for ourselves. We have to put money. So funding in that sector is very important, because we are losing scientists, and very good scientists who have had to leave. On KEMRI funding alone, you find they cannot survive.
So we have a brain drain.
Yes, there is a brain drain, and funding in the health sector should really be key, because right now, I'm sure you've also done analytical work on health sector funding, and you'll find that that data is now very much disaggregated, because health is a county government function. Policy is national government. But overall, can we look and see what proportion of budget is going to the country, to the health sector? Is it 15% of total budget? No,
it's 7%. So. It's 7%. It's about 7%.
We are barely at half.
Yeah.
Yes, we are barely at half. So we are not going to improve as a nation if we are a sick nation.
Right. The other issue, and on that point, the other issue, sorry to cut in, is the point you both raised about the food supply, food security.
Yes.
And what are the impacts of government's COVID response on the food supply chain? What are the implications for food security? Charles has a very dire warning for us, very dire scenario. Are we facing an imminent food shortage, and what needs to be done? What needs to be done? And we'll start with you, Miriam, and then Charles can chime in.
Okay. You see, in terms of food supply, we are not looking at the value chain. We are looking at the supply chain. It's substantially closed. Closed in the sense that we're already talking of no movement inter-county, let me say. Where is our food basket? It's in the, let me call it the old Rift Valley. The grain basket is in the Rift Valley. So for you to supply livestock or meat, a lot of meat comes from that region. A lot of maize comes from that region. It has to reach Nairobi. When you've already put the blocks, they are allowed to travel, but within certain times, which is a good thing. But remember, you are not enforcing it within the same sector. It's a different sector enforcing it. We are talking security. And from what we've seen, I think the joke that is going around is that whenever these briefings are taking place, the security sector should also be there to interpret to us what they've understood with those directives, because they seem to get it differently. So these interactions while they've been allowed, but in a managed manner, one is slowing down food supply, is raising prices of food supply. So by the time it reaches Nairobi or it reaches Mombasa, what is the cost? So there could be access, but the cost is prohibitive. But there is also the case where it is just not available. So those are two key issues when we are talking about the supply chain. And I know there have been a lot of initiatives. And if you saw the committee that was gazetted under ICT advisory, you'll find that there were the likes of Twiga Foods and quite a number of experts in that area. And one of the things we're trying to do is to see how to use ICT platform to generate information to ensure that there is adequate food supply in the region, and particularly where there is lockdown. So that is a very good initiative, but what percentage of market are we talking about? And in these supply chains, now that we are talking about supply chains, how can we bring hawkers? Remember, hawkers are at the end of the supply chain after the bulk breaking. So you brought a whole truck from, let's take Muranga with potatoes. It's reached a depot. It has to be broken down to smaller trucks. And you find that then there are distributors who will take it to the different destinations where other sellers are taking it to the markets or to the consumers. So when hawkers are away, we are going to also have a glut where they supply, but the destination is not being reached. With the security right now, you find people are more buying things from the supermarket and not the markets because they suspect hygiene and such issues. So back to the first point I raised, have we recognized hawkers as a key player in the supply chain? The markets, they're the distribution points, but even with the markets, they still break it down to different sellers. Have we recognized them and the role they play? Because right now you'll find they have masks and everything, but they're so easily bundled in the police vehicles for not adhering to one thing or the other. So if we don't include the informal sector players in this supply chain, the food insecurity will rise because of high costs. And even where supply is available, there will be a glut because it cannot reach the intended consumers. And people are also not buying because they don't have the money. Not everyone can buy in bulk for 3 months. Yeah.
Right. Charles, Miriam's painted out the blockages in the food chain. In your view, what needs to be done? I mean, you can feel free to chime in, but also we want to move towards some proactive proposals. What can be done? And Miriam has also pointed out this. I think and then the other thing you can address is who will be affected by this food shortage. David D believes the upper deck is more at risk, middle class who don't have much recourse. We are here talking about informal settlements. So what needs to be done? And if this isn't done, who's likely to bear the brunt of it?
Yeah, so first of all, I'll start by saying that we are not in a state of emergency. And because we're not in a state of emergency, there is absolutely no need to deploy all manner of security apparatus to block roads. What we need is, we are in a state of emergency response. And therefore, what government needs to do is mobilize all sectors to then go into emergency response mode, all sectors, to go into emergency response mode. Why? Because there are compounding factors that is now leading us into this food crisis. One is food production has been disrupted negatively. Why? Because of movement of inputs. When you restrict movement of inputs into the farms, you have already interrupted production. So things like fertilizer and seeds and all these kinds of things are not moving at the pace at which they were moving before, you know, because every manner of truck is stopped, is checked, you produce documentation. So a lot of these traders are opting not to because of the rigmaroles, you know, the bureaucracy is just too much, and drivers are complaining that they're being harassed left, right, and center. If you go to the highways now, trucks have backed up kilometers because of this, you know, being checked, being tested, and everything else. So movement of inputs to where they are needed to produce food has been hampered. Secondly, because of the mantra, the new normal of stay home, stay home, stay home, people who initially had some form of income have now closed in on that income because of the uncertain future. The implication is that the remittances that were leaving the urbans to go to the rural to support in food production have been held in urban. So people like myself who are supporting our parents in the farms are now cagey with the money we spend because we're not sure of what the future holds, you know? So we're telling them, maybe just do 1 acre for now, leave the other acres, because we don't know how this thing is gonna go. That means that we have contributed to cutting down food production, you know, and that kind of thing. That's why I'm a big advocate that businesses need to reopen, people need to make money. That money was serving several purposes, including supporting food production in the farms, you know, because of the remittances and leasing of the farms and this kind of thing. So people are holding on to their money now and not using it. And what we're going to see in the near future is there was no food produced, and therefore there's no food to be traded. Now, the other bit, of course, is to understand something very, very critical, Shiro, that 98% of food retail in Kenya is through the informal trade. 98%, whether it's meat, whether it's vegetables, whether it's fruits, 98% of food retail in Kenya is through the informal trade. The most affected sector in Kenya today is informal trade. Informal trade is not usually licensed. So when you tell people who have been supplying meat or vegetables that the truck driver must have a letter saying where it's coming from, where's going, they don't have the letters. These people, the only documentation they have is a small permit here and there somewhere behind the show. So they don't have properly registered business names with letterheads and letters, and now give every driver and every small pickup carrying food to whichever the destination. What they have done, therefore, is they have opted not to. So because of this, unajua utashikwa, you'll be arrested, you'll be doing all these things. So we'd rather than not transport. What it has, the implication is that 98% of that retail system has been closed out. What we need to do is appeal to government to see sense in understanding what they have not cared to understand before on the food system in this country. You know, and that food system is not supermarkets and registered shops. Food system is every 98% outside of supermarkets. You know, that is the Kenya's food system. Food system is not the 5% that is exported. It is the 95% that is not exported, that is produced and consumed locally here, which the government has no radar over. So when the government talks about food safety, they're talking about the 5% that gets exported. They have no clue how the 95% is produced and sold in this country. And that is what feeds Kenyans. So they need to go back quickly, take a step back, allow for conversation. We must allow for conversation by everyone affected and say, look, how best can we protect the food system? Who is involved in the food system? The COVID-19 presents the government with a critical opportunity to understand the country for once. Just call different people in different rooms or have this course like this and just say, how are you affected in your space? What has been happening before? How are you affected now? What can be done differently? It doesn't take magic or a miracle. It's a few calls. In the past 1 month since this thing broke out, they could have come up with sound solutions now. If they had an idea how to do it. But because they did have, so we are faced with this thing, and they're not listening to solutions. They're not listening to proposals. For example, let me give you an example, Shiro. Government has no clue how many Kenyan livelihoods are supported by NGOs. And yet for decades, NGOs have played the role of government in supporting the livelihoods of poor Kenyans. Since this COVID broke out, have you heard anywhere where they have called on NGOs and say, we want ideas from NGOs, we want to understand how are you affected, how are the populations you've been working with affected in terms of this, how can we rope you in terms of livelihood support? Nobody has reached out to NGOs. As a matter of fact, they go about like NGOs don't exist. And yet, millions of Kenyan livelihoods have depended on interventions by NGOs. Whether they're CBOs at the grassroots level, working with households on the improvement of livelihoods, kitchen gardens, food production, these kinds of things, improve farming practices. NGOs who basically carry millions of Kenyans have been put aside, not being consulted, not being brought in terms of drivers of this new intervention, and how to protect the food system at all. So none of that is happening, and government seems to not have a clue except roll out security people on the roadblocks, have them stop everybody else, beat those who can't speak for themselves.
Right.
It's baffling.
So government isn't listening, isn't picking the knowledge that stakeholders have and can add to the process. As we get to the end, I have maybe one last question. We're hearing a lot about the post-COVID. When we look at informal trade, when we look at the food security, can we begin talking about post-COVID, and what do those scenarios look like? And maybe we can pay a little bit of attention to informal settlements. Is it right to say there's a strong correlation between informal trade and informal settlements? And when we're talking about food security, is that a fair assumption? And how do we deal with that? And how do we look at, is it too ready to start talking post-COVID? Yeah, because you're hearing now with government, they're almost moving to that direction. Yet this conversation lends us to believe that they haven't even really begun the response. The response has been mismanaged. So just to clarify on what I'm asking, because I think there are two questions in there. One is about just tying up that issue about informal settlements and this food security issue. And then can we begin talking about post-COVID?
Absolutely, yes. I think there's reason to believe that a lot of informal trade revolves around informal settlements. And then there's data to show that, of course, because most of the middle income, high income settlements are built around formal structures like supermarkets with easy access, which you barely find in the informal settlements. And therefore, if there were to be any form of food insecurity, it will affect the informal settlements more. One, because they are hit by what Dr. Miriam mentioned earlier, disruptions in supply chains. Formal supermarkets, in the absence of local supply, they will import. And the borders will be opened quickly for them to import because the middle class and the upper class need the food. But the informal settlements will rely on local production. And if in the absence of that, they're on their own. Now, what needs to happen quickly is to reorganize food supply, food production and supply especially targeting the most hit, the informal. We must ask the question, even if you give them the conditional cash transfer, now they're saying they're going to give it at 1,000 bob per week, but there's nothing to buy with it. What are they going to use the money for? So on the one hand, while the Treasury is talking about releasing the money, the Ministry of Agriculture should be taking the next microphone and saying, look, here's how we're reorganizing food supply and distribution so that this money can be used here. The Ministry of Trade should take the next microphone to say, look, here's how we are facilitating alternative trade mechanisms. And we're engaging with the Ministry of Internal Security to open up so that if anybody says, here is food I'm transporting, let them pass. No need for many paperwork. You check the truck, are they carrying vegetables? Let them pass. It doesn't matter where the vegetable is coming from, where it is going. It is vegetables, it is being carried, it is headed in a particular direction, let the vegetables pass. Because it doesn't make sense to ask a truck driver carrying food, where are you coming from, where are you going? I mean, clearly. So, but because there's a lack of coordination in ministries, where if you're Treasury and you're announcing release of funds in billions to poor households, the person standing next to you should be Ministry of Agriculture, saying, here's how we're going to make sure that food is available to be bought by this money. Trade is standing next to them saying, here's how we're going to make sure that this food is transported with ease. We have our officers at every roadblock to ensure that they quickly check. If it is food, let it go. If it is food, let it go. We have our officers on the ground ensuring if farmers need seeds, where are seeds coming from? Can we allow seeds to pass quickly? These kinds of things. Can we allow fertilizer to pass quickly? Right. Without this coordinated effort, we are wasting time with these press briefings.
So, right. So there's lack of coordination. Now, is that government has already begun the language of post-COVID. Is it fair to really start talking post-COVID at the same time extending the lockdown? Is post-COVID, are they trying to make projections, or is government imagining that we will return to business as usual? So, what is the post-COVID discussion that we should be having? Is it time to have it now?
I think,
yeah.
I think it's rightly both.
Yeah? Okay, Miriam.
Oh,
yeah.
no,
yes.
Let him finish, let him finish.
Okay.
Let him finish, then I can.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Miriam. I think it's rightly both, that they should be thinking post and also during COVID. Because the disruptions that have been caused now will take a long time to address. And therefore, they must be thinking what mechanisms are going to be put in place to address the disruption in the economy. The economy has been hit badly. People have lost jobs, businesses are shut down, revenues have been lost. So they must begin to think post-COVID, how will we wake up? How will we move? And not just Kenya, the entire world is thinking post-COVID, with the assumption that soon enough, we're going to manage COVID. Whether it's through vaccines, whether it's through treatment, whether it's through herd immunity, soon enough, we're going to manage COVID. But after we manage COVID and structures were broken down, how do we lift up those structures? Now, there are opportunities that can be put in place now to address post-COVID. For example, what countries are doing now, which is called ISI, Import Substitution Industrialization. So you're asking yourself, what are these things that we have been importing that we are now able to import now, but we can produce locally, to survive? And we're learning magically so that we can actually make ventilators, we can produce masks, we can produce all manner of things, we can actually fabricate ICU beds. So there's no reason why our national hospital should be having 20 ICU beds. These things can be made by our Juakali sector here locally. Our companies can make ventilators, so there's absolutely no reason why we cannot seize this opportunity, this during COVID opportunity, to put in place structures that will completely change the game post-COVID. We can go the East Asia way by now, put a gradual percentage and say, if we are importing this many percent of things, after this COVID season, we want to be importing only 50% of this. And then a year or 2 years after COVID, we only want to be importing 25% of all these things, so that we make 75% locally. We grow our industries, we grow our economy, we analyze what has been slowing us from producing. We know it is high cost of production, high cost of energy, high taxation, corruption. How can we address those things now to reposition us so that when this thing is lifted, the toothpicks we have been importing, we no longer need to import. You know,
Yes,
the eggs.
true.
Yes,
Very true.
You know,
it's true.
Yeah.
Over to you. Over to you.
Yes.
Miriam, yes.
You know, Charles has talked of interesting things, and there's something he's mentioned that I just had to note down. This import substitution industrialization.
Mhm.
And I get very jittery when that word is mentioned.
Okay.
And the reason why, very good strategy. We've been under import substitution industrialization in the sugar sector for decades.
Right.
Where is that sector?
Finished.
Yes, there's
It's
lack
on
of
its
political
knees.
goodwill.
Mm.
Lack of political goodwill. We have cotton and textiles. That is a sector we should now be flourishing in because the value chain is employing so many people. Where is that sector? It's not near us. It's far away from us. So you find that the strategies under ISI, as Chancellor said, were very good. But if you look at sugar, we were always asking for waiver from COMESA on the argument of ISI. But that is where sugar barons were born. So there's no political goodwill in that sector. So when we talk about it, it's very important. I would look at where we're going from three perspectives. How did we get here? What did we do pre-COVID? Why did we have to let the Chinese in and we knew that was their epicenter? What did we do even at that time? I mean, though I remember at some point I asked myself, when I reached the airport, where is the sanitizer? So how did we get there? From a health perspective, from a trade perspective, how did we get there? From a security perspective, how did we get there? There were a lot of laxities, and you find again it goes to intersectoral or sectoral coordination. I know within government there are interministerial committees that work on sectoral coordination. Very good, but let's move to implementation because that's where our problem is. It's not the paperwork, it's not the strategy, it's the paperwork, it's the implementation. Then you realize things are different because of vested interests. So the issues of corruption are there. How can we work in a way that we are adding value to the next person? How can you work in such a way that even if you're not being paid, you do the right thing? So it still boils down to our values as Kenyans. Nothing will work if we don't have values that is going to improve someone's welfare. That's very key. Then what have we done during COVID? And how are we moving forward post-COVID? Because we are talking of what have we done during COVID, and I think I would want to commend the health sector for being on the front line with all the risks of even going on strike, but they're still taking care of people. But what have we done? Have we coordinated? This was a health problem, which turned into a security issue. I say turned into security because it was being enforced by security, not as a health problem, but more of a criminal problem. And the longer we stay on it without solutions of food security and employment or income generation, it will become a social issue. So how are we moving forward dealing with the health issue as a health problem, but not enforced as a security problem, but as a health problem, so that the social outcomes mitigate food security challenges, and at the same time, increase incomes. Because as long as we are eating and we are not producing, government is not going to get the tax that they want for implementation. If I was in a position, I would have 3 teams. I would have a pre-COVID team. How did we get here? COVID team, how have we managed it? Then post-COVID team, how are we going to move forward, ensuring that the health risk is mitigated? There is no community spread, because now we are talking community spread. But as we are reducing community spread, how do we move from stay at home to social distancing, wash hands, and just keep clean hygiene? And how do we bring in our security forces in a humane way? Because we are also complaining about the cops right now, but they've got an opportunity to make money that they've not made before. Look at their housing. Look at their work conditions. Of course, there are those ones who, even with good housing, they would still do bad things. So I would take a 3-pronged approach, but sectors coordination is very important. And then I would have to start defining the informal sector. Where do they play in the value chain, in the supply chain, in mitigating the health issues? Even in the security domain, where do they come in? Do we find them in the cells? Yet they're the ones who supply the markets. And as you can see, they are supplying a very big percentage of the markets. Because when you look at security, you find most of them are in the cells, and right now again, they are the ones who are in forced quarantine for very flimsy reasons. And then how do we start forecasting? And again, we have an IT platform. I know there are some trades that cannot move to IT, but how can we use IT in the informal sector to improve productivity, to link the supply chains? Because you know, information is power. So I think the linking IT and informal sector would be very important. What role can the informal sector play in having a voice at the national and county level? Beyond the boardroom, I'm talking about practicalities. So that is where I would start. And my conviction is that we have very innovative Kenyans who can give solutions to some of these things. But someone who's, for me, given the kind of work I do, that's the advice I would give. Then the teams who are very good in implementing will already see the gaps and how to implement. But this is a problem that is national in as much as it's individual. So the solutions must come from each and every one of us. And back to what was talked about at the beginning of elitism. Elitism has never solved the problems at the grassroots. The solutions must come from us. So that would be my starting point, yes.
And because we're out of time, I'll also request that we make that the closing point. We discussed many things, and I think I won't try and summarize, but 2 key issues coming out, or maybe 3, is number 1, dialogue. Government needs to dialogue with the sector, needs to listen. There are solutions within the sector. The wearer of the shoe knows where it pinches, and will have the remedies. So we need dialogue. The next thing coming up is that we need to watch the food chain. And we need to take urgent mitigation around the food chain. I think the last thing I've heard is that there are opportunities to use COVID to actually enhance the sector through the import substitution industrialization. but it comes back to the issue of political will, the issue of of the interests. So what we are saying.
Sorry, just as you're adding, I think this is the time to revive our manufacturing sector.
Okay.
Still within manufacturing sector.
Right. Yeah. So COVID actually is showing us where there are major breakages or bottlenecks, and it gives us the opportunity to open them up. And political will is key to that. And because we don't have time to begin discussing how to untangle and create political will, we'll leave with that, knowing that this is a problem we face in this country, that there are elite interests that are, really playing against our development. But we continue the conversations and hope that these conversations will reach to policymakers and other agencies who can take them forward. So Charles and Miriam, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the knowledge.
Thank you.
Thank you for bringing your voices not usually heard, but very important perspectives that need to be heard. And we also thank the Elephant, because the Elephant has a good platform through which we'll be able to share this. So I wish you both stay safe. Good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And yes, thank you.
Asante.